You know the phrase that pays kakank. Yes. Yes. Well, hello there, Steve Conley. Internet on the wall. Who are the fairest of the wall? Well, it's your three expert cartoonists. That's who. Welcome back to Pencil to Pencil. If you see, get ready for it, your three smiling angelic countenances. That means some things are about to happen. One, it must be Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST, somewhere in the world. Two, you're about to be ensorcelled by our matinee idol good looks and lantern jaws. And three, it's time to be educated. And it's also pinch me, I must be dreaming time. I threw another thing in there. Guys, well, hello, welcome back to the live cast. Let's do some introductions. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS, your first host. And also, besides this very red hat I'm wearing, I wear many other hats. I'm on the board of the National Cartoonist Society. I'm the Philadelphia chapter chair. And I also am a graphic novelist, Scholastic Graphics. Leon and the Big Problem is my newest book out November 3rd. Steve, what should they do?
Why don't you?
Why don't you? I don't know why you don't. Why don't you?
Why don't you?
As my mother used to say, correct your actions, fix your face. Fix your face, Steve Conley. Guys, I would be remiss if I did not introduce my cohort, co-conquistador, and Coco Queso. I brought this back because Mike loves it so much. You know that man walking down the side of the lonely internet superhighway with a melodic tinkle at his back. Don't ask him to fix your car tire in the rain, because if that jack breaks, he's going to turn green. You do not want that in your life.
Don't jam this guy's knuckles, man.
don't have it happen. You don't want this. You don't want this heat. I'm remiss if I did not introduce my good buddy. By God, it's Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Gentlemen, it is so good to see you. Wow, I'm just overwhelmed. My name is Steve Conley. You may know me from your 12th favorite webcomic, The Middle Age, which you can find at Webtoons, Tap as Go Comics, and at middleagecomic.com. I am a card-carrying member of the National Cartoonist Society. Go Birds.
Go Birds.
And I also make Dungeons and Dragons stuff. So if you want to spice up your D&D table with some D&D fun, you can check out wildestshape.com. Currently crowdfunding over on BackerKit. And also I'm a reader of Leon, a fan.
Yeah, tell him.
Look at that. Look how beautiful that is. Look at
that. The checks in the mail, Steve Conley.
But I would be remiss
Yeah.
if I didn't introduce the Tower of Power, the Man Hour, Too Sweet to Be Sour, Dark Hawk's daddy. He draws 2 comic strips a day, and that's after drawing your childhood. Yeah, do all that, and then he's drawing 2 comic strips a day. Like, and you should be grateful. We should all be grateful for the magnificent, the mercurial, the marvelous, magnificent Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, today was one of those days. One of those 3 project day days, because I worked on the strips and then I was working on preparing for tonight's episode.
Yeah.
It was a long day. Started at 5 o'clock this morning. So
That's a long day.
that's a long day. Yeah.
That's the longest yard right there.
Yeah. But that's the way it is. Some days are long. Some days are long.
Well, you know what's funny, Mike? We were talking before in the green room, you guys, and I just came back from a school visit. I traveled to kind of like West New York to a lovely little town and had a school visit and got a lot of love. I say things like that fills my cup. And when we talk about this kind of traditional book publishing world that I'm in, it all sounds very interesting and fantastic. But there's so much more underneath this iceberg. Kind of like the travel part or the PowerPoint presentations in front of a whole assembly auditorium full of 5th graders. Right. So there's also other skills that you have to learn, like crowd control.
How did you approach the first time you were asked to come to a school to give one of these presentations? Where did you even start?
You know what? I think I probably phoned a friend. I'm happy and lucky enough to know people who have been doing this stuff, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, what grade are they? And I'm like, well, what does that matter? Oh, it matters a lot, because if you have like the littles, like the peanuts, you've got like K and kindergarten and 1st grade kids, your presentation is going to be a lot different than their 6th graders, and everybody's doing 6, 7, and they're all like dancing and all that in the aisles, so you kind of have to like have like one main thing, but being able to call audibles and modify it for the kids that you're in front of. Now, I do know there are some authors, and I think we're super lucky to be cartoonists, Steve Conley, because, and even some of the instructors that were at the school said, you know what, you have such a leg up on a lot of the other author visits because you can draw.
You can immediately make magic happen, right? You
can stand there and do the thing, and the kids are like, whoa. And it's probably a different lift if you're, a writer with a book, or you're like reading, or, you're like, oh, here's an excerpt from chapter 6. You know what I mean? Like, that's a whole different lift than I have to do. But, you kind of like modify it as you go along and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So,
do you get a read of the room like pretty quickly, like, oh, this is a good crowd, or they're bored, or they're restless, or they got Jimmy legs?
A lot of Jimmy legs. You know what happens? And I was at the school like basically all morning until the beginning of the afternoon. The first, like the 9 o'clock crew is sleepy. Then the after lunch crew is out of control. And then the 3 o'clock, the buses outside crew are restless. You know what I mean? So it kind of goes like that the whole time. So it's almost like the time of your assembly is also super important, because you're dealing with a kid full of dino nuggets and chocolate milk. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, it's always interesting. And so anyway, I wanted to just say that because Mike's day in the office was a lot different than my day in the office yesterday, but it's all relative. It's all connected.
Yeah, I haven't done a school visit in a while. Well, I mean, I used to teach, but I haven't done a school visit in it's been a long time, because after I started teaching, I really didn't do that. Like I would do my class. So
Yeah.
And that was different because every week the college class is always the same kids,
Right.
same students for a whole year, whole semester. But the high school class was every week was different. Every week was really different because you got kids that show up once, never come again. You get kids that show up 5 times, never come again. And there were kids like Liang, for instance, who came for like every year for years while she was in high school, and then all through college. That's how I got to know her, right? And eventually ended up hiring her as an assistant. And then usually in that class, because it's come as you want, you'd always whittle it down. So you might start. I remember the most we ever had one day was we had almost 60 kids, which was crazy. Because by the time they would come in at different times, because every school got out at a different time.
Right, and it kind of trickle in, right?
Right, and if you're depending upon how far away, and you got to take the bus or the L or whatever to get to the school, there was a constant stream between, let's say, 2:30. There might be kids waiting to like, oh, the class is over at 5:30. There's kids coming in at 5 o'clock.
Right.
So that was very different because it was never the same from week to week. Usually what would happen though is that by the middle point, you were down to your regulars.
It kind of almost like a gold pan, like it kind of sips itself out after a while.
Yeah, because there were guys who came because there was girls, right? So they're going to come and say because they want to hang out with the girls. And then there's people that come in and then like, well, this is not for me. This is not my thing, And then every week there was always like, oh, my teacher told me about this class. And that's like their first class.
Right.
So it was pretty challenging just because the logistics of getting everybody to come in, introducing them to what this class is about, which is different than, life drawing or still life or whatever. And then finding out what they're interested in. And then trying to find a way of creating a project for them to work on, right? Like I can give you an assignment, but isn't that kind of boring if I just tell you, like, go over and draw a shoe, right? Because this is illustration. You can make anything. You can do a comic. You can do an album cover. You can do basically anything, right? So it was always that sort of 20 questions and I try to figure out things real quick to figure out like, okay, this kid comes in, has got a backpack with a bunch of bent up comic pages. I know what that kid's going to want to do, right? And then you have the other kids that come in and are like, I don't know. What do I like? I don't know what I like.
Tell me what to draw.
Right, yeah. And then you give them the scariest thing in the world, which is a blank sheet of paper. Right? For some people, it's not a problem, but for other people, a blank sheet of paper is like, whoa, what the heck is that?
I know that is really wild. And I would say this for any of you cartoonist types out there, you should really try your hand at teaching. You should try it. Even if you're like, what? I love drawing stuff, but put me in front of a room full of 4th graders. I'd rather poke my eyes out. I think it's good. I think it's good for you to figure out how to, speak the language, how to win them over, or even kind of see what they like, right? I think that's a big part of it. Like, do you kind of speak kid world language? It's not just knowing the cool slang that they came up with and forgot in a week, but it's like, do you know
think about what you do? How you do what you do, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which you can sit here all day and work for days, weeks, months, years, and never really consciously think about how you do what you do. right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've seen that come out when we interview people, and sometimes we don't have great interview people. No, and that's no shots, but it's kind of like you can kind of tell that some people aren't used to having to talk about their work. Hey, tell us about your stuff. I mean, I don't know. I just like I don't know. So all of that stuff is practice. Steve, did you want to field a couple of these questions and then we'll get the show started?
Yeah, let's do that. We got one from George Gant.
What up, George?
Hello. Question about school visits. Are rectangular pizzas still a thing?
Yes, and it's very rare these days that I get to have lunch with like, especially with the kids. Like that's a whole thing. Like can you sign my forehead? Like I don't want to get.
Can you sign my pizza?
We get surrounded by kids asking you like really weird questions. I'm like, I'm not touching anyone. No, I'm not doing that. So, and the times that I've been in cafeterias, yeah, pizza day still is a thing, and that rectangle is still a thing. But I've also been in some really like kind of highfalutin schools where they have like like a Starbucks in the corner and stuff like that.
So, I thought you were going to have like intravenous tubes coming down and from the ceiling, and hoisting you up and filling you with fluids of the gods.
Wow, I haven't been in that. That's a cyber school, probably.
And we got another one from Scott Kurtz. Hello, Draw with Scott.
What up, Scott Kurtz?
YouTube. I just started doing these school visits, and they're a blast. And I'm told they're great for book sales, but I don't understand how.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you consider like one of your school visits is kind of talked about ahead of time. I talked about this in the green room. So say you have a school or a school district or a county or some sort of body gets in touch with you and like, we would love you to come to Virginia, Scott, and do some school visits with our kids. And we work with a local bookseller. And if the schools do what they're supposed to do, remember you used to go home with a paper for your parents to sign, if it wasn't in the bottom of your backpack. Hey, Scott Kurtz is coming to school next month. If you'd like to buy his books, here's the form. And
yeah.
And if the parents are kind of paying attention, they'll order these books. So you'll show up at the school and there's somebody with like one of those library carts just with lines of your books for you to sit and sign and personalize for these kids. That stimulates your book sales. Also that has to look good on your reports with independent bookstores, which also helps you get on the New York Times bestseller list. It can't hurt, but the school kind of has to do the lifting.
Is that part of the conversation when you start talking with the school? Hey, do you want to get some of these books? Or
well, most of the time the schools know how this works. So like you're not inventing the wheel when you show up to do a school visit. Like they do this stuff already 9 times out of 10. So they'll tell you usually like, well, we have a bookseller who we do business with. That's fine. Or some people are like, oh, I've also been in situations where they are not really good at this, and they go, oh, we tried to order 400 of your books from Barnes and Noble, but they were out. It's like, well, there's other ways you could do it, and you may have to educate them. It's like, listen, reach out to your local bookstore and see if they can help you out. So that's all kind of the conversation that happens before you get there. But you really, especially in the situation that you have a publisher and you're not self-publishing, that you shouldn't be walking into the building with a trunk full of books to sell. Like that, they should be doing it.
Right. That's
great.
That
answered Scott's question.
And Scott followed up with he did an author visit with the middle school's D&D club, and now he's being invited to 3 other schools / libraries. So it builds on itself.
Oh yeah, that word of mouth is really a giant part of it. And it's also part of your hustle, like talking about what we do in the chair all day. That's another part of it. Do you have a week of administrative stuff to drum up business for next school year?
Wow.
You got to do that too. So, but thanks for that preamble. That was really cool. I'm glad we got to talk about that stuff. Just another facet of the decahedron that is cartoon. So let's get the show started, you guys, because thank you, Dave. Speaking of talking about education, Master Manley is here tonight with us for a new lesson. And hold on, Mike, I'm gonna drum this up. You ready?
Okay.
All right, hold on a second. No, hold on. Let me get it together. Get it together. Did it. Look at my hold on. Look at my eyes. What do you see? Page personality. Mike Manley tonight is going to take us through our paces of how each cartoonist or comic illustrator puts his mark on a comic book page. Mike Manley, take us into the void, why don't you?
Oh, okay. When we were talking about an idea the other day of what were we going to do, I was thinking I had just seen a Neil Adams drawing from Green Lantern, and I was thinking like, well, we've talked about all these different things, and one of the things we've talked about the formal aspects of composition and things like that, but one of the things that really struck me was, in fact, let me bring this up.
Steve, can you do that?
You want me to add that to the screen there, Mike?
Here.
Cool.
Let me do this. Let me do this one. Hold on a second.
I'll dazzle the chat with some prestidigitation.
Share my screen.
I see something up there already. I don't know if that's what you're looking.
I'm not sure if I'm going to ruin the surprise, Mike, if I put this on the screen. Oh, went away.
And guys, thank you so much for joining us live again. We haven't done a kind of workshop episode in a while, so I'm glad that we could get back to it. So I think he's ready now.
Yeah, you can share this one. So I was looking at this the other day. This came through my feed, and I was thinking about how there's certain artists like Neil Adams who his part of his dominance in the field was his skill at drawing, but also him breaking rules and stretching things graphically in the 60s, because traditionally comics, which started as comic strips, were kind of conservative. And in the 60s, when a lot of things were going through a lot of change as far as graphic design and things like that, he started pushing not only his drawing, but also his concept of page layout. And I was thinking at the same time, and this whole lecture is sort of based upon a lot of the artists that influenced me and how I came to learn this stuff or absorb this stuff coming up, because I never had any classes on comics. I never had anybody teach me or lecture to me. I was sort of all these things I sort of figured out, but I was thinking this is a really good example of something that Neil did that was not typical at the time, especially at DC, which was more conservative in a way than Marvel. When you start studying the history of the business, you realize that part of the comics code and all the stuff that fell out of the 50s was making things very straightforward, very sort of chaste in a way. Because if you go back before the comics code and the whole thing in the 50s, there was a lot of really crazy stuff, and then it kind of got all toned down. But to me, this says as much about not only his bravura drawing, but his personality, because it draws attention to him in a way that if you just use the grid, it doesn't. It, because of the way he broke up not only time and space, because you have this first panel, and then you have the second panel, which is afterwards, but of course the shape of Green Lantern's body contains that next panel. And that was not something that was very typical. It was really much more, it brings it in a lot of graphic design aspects that were not as prevalent in comics, I think, until probably the 60s, because you had Adams, and then you also had people like Jim Steranko, which I'll show you. But I thought, you know, when you look at this, you're seeing his personality in a way that a lot of artists would see their personality or their style in the way that they drew something, but not necessarily in the way that they laid out a page. It's like, oh, I'm breaking the rules here. I'm going to really do something dramatic. And it was a little bit different, or very different in a way, because you could look at a lot of Green Lantern comics from the 60s drawn by people like Gil Kane or whoever. They never did anything like that. So that really started making me think about, as a kid growing up, probably the two most influential comic book artists to me were also sort of at the opposite ends of the scale. And I've talked about this before, because you had somebody like Neil Adams, who brought in like this realistic drawing and sort of this Madison Avenue level of slickness. And then you had somebody like Jack Kirby. But Kirby was an artist who really kind of stuck to the grid, even though he drew very abstractly and powerfully. It was within the panel. So when I saw this, I thought, well, this would be the subject of tonight's. This might be interesting for people to think about it, because I think in general now, we're so used to people being flashy, we don't really think about it. But a lot of people really just stuck to the grid.
Mike, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike, but could you, just for people who may be a little new to this, explain what the grid is? Are you referring to the 6-panel layout grid of?
Yeah. So let's see here. I'll pull up another one here in a minute.
Okay.
So
I love it. I love brass tacks. And for anybody that's getting confused, I took the chat off the screen so we could pay attention to. Oh no! Oh no! He disappeared. He'll be back. I know he will.
We'll vamp.
Yeah. I'm good at that.
Yeah, I thought that Neil Adams page, that Green Lantern page, I thought was actually, the personality was the kind that the letterer would hate. It's that bottom right corner where they had to just put the text over the hand. I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I'll bring him back in.
Thanks, Comcast.
Hey, Mike. All right, carry on.
Let me show you here.
Did you like my Live in Color singing earlier?
Yeah, I saw them in concert, man. I'm old.
So here you go. You see that?
Okay. Yeah.
Got it. Oh,
this is
cool.
A great example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The grid,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So here's this whole great silent, except Stan he could not put that damn caption box up there. But this is what I'm talking about, the grid, right? And a lot of artists like Kirby or Ditko especially, they would draw, and a lot of the DC stuff would draw stuff as a grid, in a grid. And here, it's actually every panel is even. But I think this is a fantastic example of how even though this is incredibly dynamic, you've got great foreshortening and exaggeration and gesture and action and everything, it's all within the grid. And one of the things about the grid is it focuses you what's inside the panel, right? It's saying, look at this. And you can follow along and you don't think about having to read it. You just naturally follow along.
Mm-hmm.
The example I showed previously of Neil Adams showed you something that drew attention to itself. So while it was cool, I also think it pulls you a little bit out of the story. Right? And so I think this is the challenge and the excitement. So there's, really no rules broken, let's say, when you use the grid. And a lot of comics, especially a lot of kids comics, Archie, all the funny animal comics, all the Richie Rich, they were always grids. Superman comics, grids. Batman comics, grids. All the Sunday comic strips were a grid. Rarely you saw somebody play around with it, but usually the syndicates were kind of conservative, so they generally didn't like to do that. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the grid. You don't really think about it. You just read it. When you looked at the Neil Adams thing, you were going, oh, I'm reading it, but also I'm looking at this trick he's playing around with, right? So I feel that part of that was him trying to make things exciting. But sometimes when you make things exciting, maybe you're also pulling people away from the flow of the story. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and almost the Neil Adams piece felt like doing it for the sake of doing it. It didn't feel like it was in his service to the story as much as something like this is. Do you think does this page have a personality, Mike?
Yes, because it's all very kinetic action.
Right.
And it's Kirby's personality. I mean, if you're a fan of Jack Kirby, this is pure Jack Kirby, right?
So the grid being constrained or working within the grid is not necessarily indication of less personality, right?
No. I one of the things that made me think about this was when I started storyboarding, your composition is always the same when you're working in film or animation. It's always the same composition. Everything fits within that like 2x3 composition. And so what you do is you concentrate on what's in the composition. The panel is not changing. It's not getting taller or shorter or wider or slimmer, except when they started doing letterboxes. You would kind of get a longer, thinner, longer thing. But 99% of the movies you watched, 99% of the TV shows you watched, they didn't use letterboxing. That was like a special thing. So, let's see here. I'm going to bring up another one. And so to start out, I was going to do here we go.
That one ready to go?
Yeah, you see that one?
Yep.
Okay, so I always like to go back in time a little bit. So for the narrative in comics started in comic strips. And one of the first realistic narrative strips was Hal Foster adapting Tarzan, which he did before he did Prince Valiant. And I think that this shares a lot in common with what Kirby did, because you know, you had, and this was a whole page, which was amazing back in the day. You know, when you opened up the newspaper on Sunday, it was an event, right? But again, it's all the same size, so it's a grid. But because it's the grid, you don't really think about it being the grid, so you just read. You just read, you know, and everything. And he also did a lot of middle shots. It's very clear and very easy to read instantly when you look at that panel. You're not confused, partially because of his very clear staging and where he put the black, but also because it's really easy for you to read. And when we start reading comics as kids, we don't read. We look at the pictures. And comics really operated on the fact that you could read the comic without reading the comic. You didn't have to necessarily read the word balloons, right? So you can read this. And you know, this was in the 30s, and this was very influential on everybody who came after this, right? It was very influential on Kirby, because he was a young man when he was looking at that stuff. And then later on, when he was doing Prince Valiant, same thing. And what you notice is you're not seeing word balloons, right? This is a little bit more like a half step between a comic and like a children's book, because all the captions are at the bottom, right? All the captions are at the bottom. So, and you know, there's probably in this, because there's more storytelling. You're seeing scenes, you're very careful scenes, right? And so he supposedly took like 80 hours a week to do each one of these strips. It's pretty amazing. And then this was probably his most famous Sunday, the bridge. And you can see how, you know, he's bringing this sort of negative space. He really, for him, the negative space was also really important. So you can see everything very, very clearly. So he was a great early influence on many, many people, because nobody had really done that. No, I'm not showing. Another great person in the beginning was Milton Caniff. And his stuff was a little bit more cartoony. And then when he started working with Noel Sickles, he started getting a little bit more realistic. But I wanted to go and show hold on a second. Let me do this.
And while Mike's doing that, what are you doing? You need to be hitting the like button on YouTube so we can fight the rhythm. Not the rhythm's going to get you, the algorithm. So correct your actions.
So you guys seeing this?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the first Flash Gordon strip by Alex Raymond. And again, it's in a grid.
World coming to end.
Right. And again, one of the things about the grid is that you just start automatically reading. You don't stop. It doesn't pull you out. You're not looking at, some crazy design or whatever. You're just reading. You're going along and you're reading. Right. And I think this was 36, somewhere around there. Later on, panels got bigger and his drawing became much more elegant. And Hal Foster was a huge influence upon him. So again, you're just reading. There is not often word balloons. Sometimes you're just looking at an action. But again, just the grid.
Mike, was there a part of this where kind of maybe later in the language of comics that people went, oh, I can put the guy's foot through this, and people started breaking the grid? Or was it kind of like,
well, yeah,
point where they didn't know they could do that?
Right, and we're gonna get to that. And one of the things I think that's really important is to see the evolution of a visual language, because you really started out with everybody was kind of doing the grid, right, and the drawings became more realistic. Even if you were looking at the Katzenjammer Kids or Popeye or whatever, everybody was pretty much just using the grid. So you had division of space, what went in the panel. I don't think that they were getting as influenced by cinema yet. Right? Later on, you started seeing people getting, even Raymond, when he came back from the war, he did Rip Kirby. And you could feel it was a little bit more influenced by film noir, but you don't see the camera lens in the way that you start seeing stuff later on. So I just thought this was really interesting to see. If you think about, in the beginning, everybody was using the grid, and what was important was what was inside the panel, not the shape of the panel or anything like that. That came a little bit later. Let's see here. I'm on my
chat. What do you think of this episode so far? Let us know in the chat.
They're probably bored.
No, they're at rapt attention. I hope no one's overexcited by the use of language, because not only am I handsome, Steve Conley, I know stuff, so I'll be saying words sometimes.
No, here's another example of what I was talking about. So here's Winsor McCay.
Shout out to Winsor McCay,
who was super creative and just beautiful strips, but it's all a grid. And what's inside is very fantastical, beautifully colored, very different feeling than either Raymond or Foster. But I think this stuff is gorgeous. And again, it's what is happening within, right? And then he also has these little teeny panels. So he starts playing around with the size of the panels, thin panels, big panels, meta panels. What we call a meta panel, like this one at the top would be like a meta panel where you see all this world and all this stuff going on. What I find interesting about these old strips like this is that the word balloons are very small, so if this was not the old giant tabloid size, it would actually be very hard to read.
Yeah, those newspapers, those originals were giant.
So here's another guy who was playing around with just whatever's inside the grid can be very creative. And he also does a lot of medium shots where he's repeating the same size, and you can see the characters acting and moving almost across a stage. So a lot of this is across a stage. And so the use of space, along with the use of the grid, is working together. And some people have the grid, but what's inside the grid is very different. And as we go along, as the language of comics starts to develop, and I think also becomes influenced by film, you start seeing artists play around with the differences of these two aspects of storytelling. And now let's go. So I'm going from Foster and Raymond, and then another early proponent of playing around with the format in the space was Will Eisner. So here's a couple spirits where now he's bringing in graphic design and always playing around with the logo and playing around with this big giant sort of meta panel, but then like all these little panels within the panel. So we have a grid within a meta panel. And then you have breaking the rules. So this is a panel, but then these panels are within this meta panel. So you started getting a very different use of space and how you read this and how you read it graphically and how your eye moves through the page. And he was very influential. He still used the grid, but he's choosing here to use the grid to show the sort of humdrum character, right? And so if you're trying to show this humdrum character, this humdrumness, and you're just doing regular static panels, it reinforces that aspect of the storytelling and the character.
Mm-hmm.
Eisner was a guy who showed other artists that you could break these rules and play around with this. The sense of what the space is, what the panels are, and how they relate to each other within a construct. Because when you think about it, this is kind of crazy, right? Here, you're just reading along. But here, you've got this, what? He's standing behind his name, right? And you've got all this writing, and then you've got this little story going on in here. I mean, this is really complicated and very sophisticated. It's working on more than just straight grid storytelling.
You know, he playing chess, other people playing checkers.
Right.
I had to laugh at myself when I said
So now I'm going to show some more Kirby. So here's an early Kirby.
Mike, while you're doing that, D Fish, what up, D? D says, it's interesting how in a lot of those early McKay strips, how the artists would number the panels so readers knew the order when the visual language of comics was still so new.
So here's an early Kirby, right? Captain America. Breaking the border. And then you've got these really crazy panel, like, you know, he's leaping forward and it's like bending the panel.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right. So that's 41. And then we were looking at we had seen 20 years later that Captain America that I showed, right? But in the 50s, he became probably more conservative. And you can see here's a grid. Everything's in the grid. What's in the grid is pretty fantastic.
That's intense.
Right? You know, it's great. Yeah. He did these great war comics, but it's the grid. And again, I think one of the things about the grid is that you read, and then you start looking what's in the panel. When you do this, your attention is pulled to how this is laid out as much, if not more sometimes, than what's going on in the panel, right? Because when I see him jumping and I see this, the panel borders are bent, right? Your eye goes like this, but that kind of competes to me with what's going on inside. So it's as much about this. When I look at this, I'm just looking at what's inside the grid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's kind of, and you know, he's a bomber, right? And all these, you know, shells coming out and everything. And then, even though it's a grid, you get this nice big landscape panel, which really gives you a sense of space and scale. And I think he was very conscious of that fact of just telling the story. Where I think here he was more mature and he was trying to make things exciting, right? So is this more exciting or is this more exciting? I think this is more exciting. Even though this might be more creative, when I read this, I'm connected to what's going on in the story.
Yeah, and storytelling's clearer. I feel like the 4-panel one, there's some question as to which panel to read in which order. That you do risk that the second you start breaking that grid down.
Right. So same thing here. You know, this is just a typical, you know, mid-70s Kirby page. But you read it, you don't even have to think about it. You read it, you understand very clearly what is going on. And he really stuck to this format for most of his career, right? Most of his career. And even when he did like a big meta panel, he tended to stage it so that you are actually in this is like your point of view. You are actually in this tableau, right? That was something that was part of his personality, to put you in the tableau, right? So here you get a little weird little variation of this grid, which I sort of think like, well, why did he do that? Did he just like, oh, you know, do you need that? You know, it kind of jumped. And so I think as he went on in his career, he did less of that. I'm going to show another thing here.
While Mike is setting that up, I'll ask the chat if they have any specific questions for the lesson tonight that we can throw on here as we.
So here's a later Kirby page from the Silver Surfer Annual, and it's pretty straightforward, except you kind of see an echo back to his earlier layout, where he's got these kind of funky panel shapes, right? He also used in his earlier in his work in the 40s, you would see a lot of these circular panels. So I think it's interesting to think, well, I mean, this is a pretty harrowing scene, these people being machine gunned against a wall, right? And if he had made this not these weird panel shapes, because I sort of feel like because he did that in a way, it pulls away from what you see in the panel above it, right? So one of the things I question now, one of the formal things I think about is when you do something highly creative or unusual, does it eject you from the continuity, or does it enhance the continuity? And I think that, well, I really like this page. I sort of feel that it ejects you from the continuity because it's pulling my attention to those irregular shapes. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, but you know, I feel like unlike the Neil Adams example, I feel like there could be a narrative reason why the chaos of those panels below kind of echo the chaos above. You know, I feel like it's not I think this is a page where a static grid, I don't know, might have felt in conflict with all the energy above or something like that. It's a really interesting choice with that actual panel border around that second panel on the bottom row, but then a kind of a thin holding line for the middle panel, and then to the circular. It's a real mix. I'm amazed at the variety.
Right. Now, I also wonder, because Kirby's style is, by this point, very abstract, and everything in it is very abstract. If you had done the same layout, but you had drawn it realistic, would it clash? Would it clash too much? Can he get away with doing this because his drawings are not realistic at all? Everything is very stylized, right? And then the shape of the grid, then, you know, you get to this last circular panel, seems to draw particular attention to itself because it is very regular as opposed to all the other shapes, right? So when you're using the grid, if it's all irregular, okay. But then when you put something that's very regular or very, very, you know, geometric, like a circle, you know, a very perfect shape, your eye is pulled right to that. Your eye goes right to that. Even though there's all this other stuff going on, your eye is pulled right to the circle because it's not like any other shape. Everything else in here is kind of this crazy, you know, crazy shapes. And then there's like, oh, this perfect circle. So it sort of forces your eye right there. So
was this page unlettered when it was published? Usually I'm used to seeing work of that period being lettered on the boards somewhere between the pencil stage and the ink stage. I mean, it's unusual to see it like this. And then a question for you, Mike. Do you think the panel border of that second, the far left panel on the bottom row, how much of that do you think might have been utility? Because he drew that pose of that figure holding that weapon in its hand. It's almost like that shape was carved to highlight that weapon, right? Like to spotlight it.
Right. Well, the way I always heard that he worked is he literally would sit down and he would start drawing at the top left, and he would just kind of go down the page, right? So you're wondering if he's like just drawing this out. And this was the last time he worked with Stan. So I have to go back and look through all my Kirby collectors. But I believe what happened was if it was how they used to work, it was probably from a plot. So he probably drew it and then Stan scripted it, right? So this looks like a decision that was made, like you pointed that out, where he was going along, and this is just sort of like an organic thing happened, right? Because Kirby didn't do layouts, right? So this just happened on live on the page, right? And you wonder, he drew that guy getting ready to crack his wife or his girlfriend in the head with that mace or whatever. If he decided that when he was drawing that, you know, did he go right from the top to the bottom, or did he kind of rough the whole thing out? He's a really interesting guy in that way, because I always heard that he just sort of sat down and went down the page. I think in a case like this, where he was just breaking down the action, which he was excellent at, it's really easy just to grid out this page. And I think this might have been one of those rush jobs where, he's got to fight this guy and you got to do 7 pages by Monday kind of thing,
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you can read it, and it's a superhero comic, so you just want to see these guys beating the crap out of each other. This is a little bit more sophisticated, right? And you're trying to show this like horrible tragedy, and the Silver Surfer, and I forget the female Silver Surfer. They're witnessing this, like they're going through some sort of time dilation, right? So it's a really interesting way of breaking up not only time, right? Because are they also witnessing these panels below, right?
Right.
And I would assume that Stan would have put all this narration in there about, you can sort of even see where he signed his name. It looked like there was going to be a balloon there or something. But I thought, well, this is a really interesting way to break up the grid. And it does sort of harken back to that Captain America panel. I think he did this in the 70s. So that was 30 years later. But I'm sure most people who read this and looked at this don't really think about that, right? They don't think about these formal qualities of like, if I'm doing something in a grid or I'm not doing something in a grid, right? One is more 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is more lyrical. This is a little bit more poetic. This is very literal, right? This is almost like a storyboard, right? This is poetic. So you can get really very effective, great, powerful superhero storytelling, and then you can get something that's a little bit more poetic. Just also by altering the shape of the panels and the grid. And again, I think these are the kind of things that a lot of people don't think about. I think it's something that also sort of fell out of fashion.
What did the grid or that kind of lyric effect you're talking about?
I think the lyrical thing sort of fell out of fashion. Yeah, I do. I think it's not like it used to be, right? Because I think that storytelling has gone through has gone through a lot of changes and a lot of influences, as we will see as we go on. I'm going to show some more. So again, here's Neil, and he's doing. And one of the things he did early in his career was doing a lot of these sort of slashy panels. Right, he was trying to break the grid. And I think he was also being very influenced by people like Gil Kane and Joe Kubert. And one of the things I learned about Joe Kubert would say, one of the ways to make something interesting is to put the camera where the camera would not normally be. So, you've got the sliding up and then sliding down. That's a pretty dynamic shot. Low angle, being on the guy's foot, or even the first panel being, where the guy's hand is. That's not sort of a normal point of view. So he's really moving the camera around through space, and you can see he's starting to elongate his characters. But I still think this is a little odd, because sometimes I think, well, that's a cool angle, and that's a cool angle, which is kind of hard to get this guy walking down the steps and then the guy down the other step, right? You're really playing with the angles, which you can do because of the shape of that panel. But this plunging of this panel, these panel shapes, pushing down on this panel at the bottom, sometimes that bothers me.
It's very experimental.
Yeah. So what's in, and I think one of the reasons why it works is this drawing is so good. You're not confused by what you're looking at, right? Like he draws all these really difficult angles, like that panel of the guy at the bottom, you know, running, and then this panel at the top looking down, all the perspective, and these great figures of Batman, you know, multiple figures coming in and leaping. Everything he draws is really, he draws it really well, even though I sort of feel like I don't agree with the slanting panels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it feels forced to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to make this exciting because I'm going to make these panels these weird, jacked up shapes, right? You know, my 15-year-old fan liked it, but my 64-year-old artist brain doesn't like it.
I think, Mike, to what you're saying, I feel like if this spread was super symmetrical, then maybe it would make more sense. You know, like if the left side and the right side had the same exact slashes in it, I could get along with it more. But I'm with you.
Okay, so now here's another. A couple years later, another Batman. Right now, what's in the panels is skewed, maybe, you know, but the panels are much more regular in shape, right? And they're bigger gutters, and you sort of have this overlay panel, right? So you have this almost like a inset, not quite, although maybe because of the top of that. But which is clearer, this? Which is more clear, this or this? I think this coloring doesn't help anything, but
No, I was thinking that.
Again, his X-Men stuff, right? And he was doing a Marvel comic, and I think he was really trying to do stuff to be really dynamic and, you know, creative, like Kirby, you know. And again, one of the reasons why I think one of the major reasons why it works is that the drawing is so good, you know. But I don't mind, the double page spread is great and everything, but I sort of like, now I don't know whether I agree with these slashy, weird shaped panels. Right?
Yeah. I like that the letterer is doing a lot to guide you through that, which is excellent. The fact that there's no lettering in the upper right, in the top of that panel, doesn't pull you over there. It lets you kind of move in that single column on the left,
Right.
and then slide right. It's pretty good.
Well, you know, this is it's kind of crazy too, because one of the things when you start violating the grid, and one of the things about this panel, or this page, is you read it, boom, 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 boom. You go right through. Here, you're kind of like, oh, my eye's pulled over here. Oh, I see this guy. Oh, here, I see this. Oh, it's like where there's the biggest area of black, your eye goes to first. Right. So my eye goes to the angel's head, and then the silhouette figures down here.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the angel above, but then this is the angel. And then you got the wings going into this frame. So are you reading down and over and then back down to the left and then back up to the right? Right? When you violate the grid, then you have all these questions about, well, now I'm laying this out. And it's not like you're laying out an illustration where it's all one image. You're laying out a sequence of events, a sequence of time, slices of time, right? So I sort of feel like one of the things it does is it sort of violates the order, the natural order of things you get very easily when you have something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You read it and you don't think, oh, this panel is touching with that panel. Right? This jaggy inset does sort of force your eye down to the last panel, where I think if the inset was within that panel and you read that, you wouldn't go, because I follow that shape and Batman and the shadow and everything over to Batman. Then my eye goes down and makes me think, oh, I'm going to read backwards. I'm going to read from right to left, right? So every time you violate the grid, right? And I think, again, like this is his personality. He's thinking, I'm going to break these rules. I'm going to show you how to lay out a page and not, fall victim to the tyranny of the grid. But I think when you do that, you do also introduce the fact that you can add a little bit of chaos to the reading. Like, I think this is very chaotic. Beautifully drawn. I like a lot of the drawing, but I find it's chaotic to read. And sometimes maybe you want something to be chaotic to read, but I don't know if the intention was to be chaotic.
Right.
Right. When I look at something that's in a grid, I go, I'm just looking at what's in the panels. I'm not necessarily having to think a lot about what's coming next. I know what's coming next, the next panel. But every time you break away from the strict grid and you start introducing these, creative ideas, it can kind of create, I think, especially for younger viewers. If you were a kid, you might go from Batman to Batman, down to Batman, and backwards. I think it's really easy to do that the way it's laid out. Just because it's forcing your eye to go that way.
Yeah.
Right? When you have a grid, you don't have to have that. Can you see this?
No, not yet.
Okay, hold on a second here.
Mike, I'm giving you a 15-minute warning.
Yeah. Do you want to work in some questions while you're sorting stuff out?
Sure.
First of all, Tristan from YouTube, the title of this episode is fantastic. Jamar gets the credit for that. Here we go.
Okay,
Mike,
so all right, so this is Neil again. Very dynamic, and he's got a kind of angled panel, but I feel it's still easy to follow, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. It follows left to right reading.
Right. Here's another one.
It's gorgeous.
Very easy to read. It also drops out. One of the things I know that this shares in common with the Kirby Captain America Batroc thing is there's all this action, so he drops the background, so you can just concentrate on Batman fighting this leopard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you don't really miss it. You don't really miss it. But I think that this is easy to read. Right? I think this is very easy to read. I think this is very easy to read, and it's very dynamic. And that's following the grid. So do we have any more questions?
Oh, yeah. America's Tom Zoller asks, who's your underrated favorite cartoonist for layout? JAMAR Nicholas.
Go ahead, Mike. What do you
got? I think we'll put a couple things here. Let's see if you guys see this. one of the guys we don't really talk about a lot for layout, but I learned a lot about layout and breaking up space was Walt Simonson.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
All right. Walt, I learned a lot about how he would break up space, and his word balloon placement also helped lead your eye through. So there's guys like Walt who are, I feel, more of a designer in layout than, let's say, Neil Adams, right? Because it's more about graphic design. It's more about shape. The layouts are very, there's a graphic design aspect to the storytelling that makes it very easy and clear to read and creative. And, you know, breaking up all these little bits of action and dynamics, right? And he doesn't draw like Neil, you know, but he's breaking up time. And he was one of the first guys I was aware of who was breaking up time in this way. There's another. A lot of graphic design started coming in.
That's cool.
Yeah,
So I
great.
think Walt is sort of underrated for that. Because I don't think, for me, it's not as much about his drawing as it is about his layout. You know, and he used to do stuff like layout comics. He laid out a bunch of Thors, and he laid out Battlestar Galactica, and they would put people like Klaus Janson or Tony DeZuniga on the inks, or he laid out a bunch of Hulks that Alfredo Alcala finished off. But his staging and his layouts were always really good and very clear and very dynamic. And so he was one of the first guys I looked at and really kind of keyed in on how he did that, right? And I think that stuff, before we
That's great.
go okay.
We've got a comment here, Deckard on YouTube. Thank you for these informative and entertaining episodes. Love all the artists mentioned here. Winsor McKay's artwork is just a joy to experience. I'll co-sign that.
And I think Walt's stuff relates really well to this Bernie Krigstein famous EC story, Master Race, by Feldstein and Krigstein. This was done in the 50s. But again, the breaking down of this guy falling in front of the train and then been looking at this guy, you know, going this image of the train passing and seeing the people in the train. I mean, just amazing. And again, this is all the grid. So you can break up a grid to a lot of little thin panels that just break down that action of the person falling. Just beautiful. And I think that this stuff sort of relates to Walt's stuff.
That's great. Question from D Fish on the YouTube. Hello, D. With Mike, does working within the more stringent requirements of newspaper strip layouts feel limiting or freeing?
That's an interesting question, because this week, I was laying out a fight between two characters. And one of the things that the comic book page gives you is real estate, gives you space, right? You don't get that on a daily strip. You get this little horizontal space. So everything has to be horizontal. You can't get very vertical. So it is very restrictive. And so it makes you really think about What do I need to show? How do I need to show it? How much of it do I need to show, right? Because I can never change the shape of the comic strip. I can change the width of a panel, but I can never change the height of a panel. So that does offer me a challenge.
That's a great question, D. Thank you for that. D also asked, I'd love to hear from all three of you about your own personal preferences in page layout, both as a reader and as a cartoonist.
Steve, Steve, you go first.
My own personal preference. My preference starts with clarity, legibility, and kind of everything flows from that. And after that, it's about the basic rules of including an establishing shot and varying the size of figures to keep things fresh, and making sure that given that my stuff is read in comic form, online and in book form, trying to keep in mind, and on thumb scrolling formats on Webtoons and Tapas, trying to keep those relationships in mind the entire time so that they can be read in all those various formats, with print being the tiebreaker. In the end, if all the websites go away, the books will remain, and so those have to take priority.
I'll say I agree with what Steve said, but I'm also thinking about not overstuffing the page, especially because I'm doing middle grade, that I kind of pull back on how many panels I do on a page. I used to be like a six panel guy, but I'll do 4, maybe 5, 4, 3, 4, 5.
They don't want that was an interesting thing I learned, is that they don't really want it to be that dense. They don't want you to be putting like 6 or 8 panels on a page.
No, it's just kind of too much, and I feel like you're kind of showing off. And it's not. I don't think it serves the story that you're trying to tell for middle grade.
But so middle grade is what age?
So we're basically 8 to 12. So like kind of like 2nd to 4th, 5th grade, something like that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, like you're not approaching this like trying to do a Deadpool comic. You know what I mean? You're just trying to slow it down and speed it up at the same time.
Right.
Also, word count, all that stuff is important. Mike,
right. It just really depends upon the story. If I'm doing like the Phantom is a very traditional adventure strip, so I'm not really trying to do anything that would not fit within that genre, right? So to me, the best layout guy ever in comic books is Joe Kubert. Superior to everybody. His page design is fantastic, right? There's other people that draw better than him and whatever, but I don't think there's anybody who ever laid out a comic book page.
Well, that segues into the question. I think Dave from of Ilum. I never knew how to, when reading Nexus, I never knew how to say it. I'm gonna say Ilum. On YouTube asks, earlier you spoke on comic strips, shooting from the hip favorite. So keeping in mind the angle we're taking here is layout, you would go with Kubert?
I learned a lot about how to lay out a page and make it interesting by studying Joe Kubert. Yeah. I learned about, drawing and storytelling and dynamics and rendering from a lot of other people. But to me, the pacing, probably, I think by instinct, probably Kirby, because it's just so natural, everything just flows. But to add that intellectual, poetic layer, Kubert, who was obviously influenced by Eisner. I mean, he worked for Eisner as a kid. So I think when he was looking at those spirits, he was seeing how you could work an intellectual layer, another layer, a poetic layer on top of your storytelling.
That's great. We got one last question from JRD. Dave, thank you for that question. A really good one. JRD, hello, from YouTube. Mike, as the newish way papers continually shrink, newspaper comics caused you to change how you lay out the strips?
Not really. I mean, because there were always shrinky dinks when I started anyway, so I couldn't really. My dad used to clip the Sunday Judge Parker from the Detroit Free Press, and literally, it was the size of a sandwich bag. It was that small, right? So you went from reading tabloid size stuff back in the day with beautiful rendering and beautiful drawing and beautiful coloring to something that's, something you can, put your Fritos inside of, and so you're aware of detail, how much you need, what won't reproduce. But, some papers might print it a little bit, like I think the Richmond Time-Dispatch, I've seen some from there when they used to carry it. That was bigger, but you never have any idea how your stuff is going to look. So you always have to try to make it as indestructible. I was going to show two other things.
And save some for next week too, Mike.
Okay. I want to show this last thing.
Thank you for that question, JRD. That took care of the questions. Wonderful questions this week. Thank you, everybody. Very thoughtful.
Okay. And can you see that? So here's Frank Miller, right? Again, really breaking up the action. A lot of small panels, very carefully composed, breaking down stuff, like second by second, right? And so you have these little panels overlaid the bigger panel. So the overlay of the smaller panels on top of a bigger panel sort of indicate that these little actions, these little things being broken, are happening at the same time, right? So you're using the grid, but you're playing with the grid and the size of the panels on the grid and the way the panels overlay each other to play around with the concept of time, the concept of second-to-second action, right? And Miller was really big on also using these horizontal panels. Although he's not the first guy to do that, as we will discuss in part 2. But when you look at the stuff, you don't have to think about reading it. You just read it. And I think that is one of the things that you get, the benefits you get from the grid. You just read it. You're looking at what's inside you're just reading, you're going along. Anytime you violate the grid and get too creative, right? You breaking the rules. You also complicate the viewer's ability to absorb what's going on. It becomes more about, I feel, in the case of somebody like Neil Adams, it becomes more about Neil Adams and not about what Neil Adams drew. Right? Like Kirby obviously had a very dynamic style. And you kind of know that when you start reading his stuff. So either sort of you like it or you don't, right? Like some people don't like the square fingers and stuff like that. But I've always felt as a kid, it was really easy to read his stuff. Same with Ditko, same with Romita. It was really easy to read it. And those guys really stuck to a grid. And they rarely broke that stuff. What was inside the panel might be crazy. Just might be, otherworldly stuff like Ditko's Doctor Strange. But you just followed the panel. And one of the things when I started early in the 80s. That was one of the things that Jim Shooter talked about. He used to carry this little comic around with him. It was an issue of, what was it, Marvel Team Up or something. It was an old Human Torch, and it was reintroduction of Captain America, but it wasn't Captain America. It was like Paste Pot Peter, the Trapster, or somebody else dressing up as Captain America. And he used to carry that, and that was the old Kirby grid thing, right? And so he used to carry that with him into conventions. And so when somebody would come up and we'd have this janky storytelling or some weird stuff, he would go, that was his thing. And I know for a fact that Jim liked my storytelling because he wanted me in the very beginning to go over and work at Valiant with him because he liked my clear, straightforward storytelling. He really liked that. And I think I did, one or two things, but I didn't, I was working on Marvel then. So I didn't, and I had heard, like he might be kind of a difficult guy to work with. So I was like, But later on, years later, interesting note to this. So about 10 years ago or so, a little bit more, I actually worked on Magnus, laying out Magnus. Jim was writing and Bill Reinhold was doing the finishes. And I was getting a little creative with some layouts, and Jim started immediately objecting. Now, I wasn't breaking any like crazy slanty Neil Adams things like that, but he was really like boom, 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 boom. No, I don't even think he really liked horizontal panels, right? He liked everything being in that grid, and I was like, well, is this a problem for you guys? You guys get somebody else to lay it out. They're like, no, we like what you're doing. So their way around that was to just not show my stuff to Jim anymore, so they wouldn't hear it. Else about me breaking the rules, but yeah, I think I feel Frank's personality when I read Dark Knight and Daredevil and all of his work. You really feel his personality, but I don't feel that his stuff asserts itself in a way that what Neil did with that Green Lantern page, which was very dynamic in the 60s, right? And I haven't even we can touch on people like Steranko.
Okay, tease next week. Tease next week, Mike. Steranko.
Yes. So we can talk about people like Steranko and Joe Kubert and people that started coming in. You could start even seeing like the European guys like Mobius. And what I find interesting is that the European artists, even though Mobius is thought of as being this like creative genius, his storytelling was actually very traditional. His layouts were very, very traditional. A lot of grid stuff, especially on Blueberry. Again, what's inside the panel may be fantastic, may be crazy, may be weird, may be, otherworldly. But the grid is like a window. It's like you're looking through this window, you're watching what's going on. And when you start to violate that grid, it's like, is it the window broken? Is it slashed down a little bit? You can't quite see. I think that there's that risk of when you get too crazy with the layout, you can pull somebody out of the narrative. Right? More so than even, and then we can also talk about how that really went crazy in the 90s with the Image guys.
All right. That'll be a perfect place to stop. Thank you, Professor Manley, for another rousing conversation and lecture.
Hello,
And
everybody.
you know, the chat was already like, "Yo, I can't wait for next week." So you know,
Tristan says part 2 is going to be great.
a lot of co-signing going on in there. So with that, guys, we're going to wheels up. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We had a packed, wrapped audience full of superstars. Don't forget between now and next week to come back to finish this. That's where you got to keep your internet bill paid so you can see this every week. So, guys, thank you so much. We're gonna call it, and Mike is going to sharpen his pencil so we can come back with the part 2
I'm gonna go
next,
take a nap. That was at 5 o'clock.
next Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. Guys, I'd be remiss if we went into that cold dark night without me telling you guys to wash those Kirby hands. Let's see some flat fingers. Give them a flat
My
finger.
fingers inside of a grid.
All of the grit. All right, guys, have a good one. Be safe. We'll see you next time.